Why does that guy look like that? Let's talk about inbreeding. Maybe you've heard of dominant and recessive genetic traits, but what does that actually mean? Well, I've said before that genes are like instructions for your cells, but today I'd specifically like you to imagine them as recipes. Imagine two different recipes for brownies. One says to add nuts, the other one says no nuts. No matter which one you follow, you'll still end up with a brownie, but they'll come out slightly differently from one another. Genes can also have these slight differences between them. For example, in one of the genes that makes your earlobes, one version can say attached and the other version can say free, nuts and no nuts. And these different versions of genes are called alleles. You have two copies of each one of your genes, one from your biological mother and one from your biological father. And because your mother and father are different people, they probably have different versions of a lot of their genes. So when the two copies you inherit have two different alleles, how do your cells know which recipe to follow? That's where dominance comes in. Basically, anytime there are two different alleles of a gene or versions of a recipe present, if one of those alleles is dominant, that's the one that cells will actually listen to. This means that recessive traits don't show up as often, because you need two copies of the recessive allele. But this is way more likely if both your parents also had two copies of the recessive allele. Do you see where I'm going with this? When two people are closely related to each other, it means that their genes carry a lot of the same alleles. That's why you look like your parents and your siblings. But if two people who have a lot of the same recessive traits reproduce with each other, there will be no dominant alleles to override them. So the more a family tree starts to overlap on itself, the more those recessive traits can start to pile up. And that's how you end up with babies who have webbed feet, hemophilia, and what was referred to back in the day as the Habsburg chin, named after a powerful English royal family in which everybody looked like just a little bit clapped. In trying to keep their bloodline clean, the royals accidentally tanked their entire genetic lineage. And people say they never did anything good for the world.